Welcome to the Unstuck Church podcast. I'm Sean Bublitz, Managing Director at the Unstuck Group, here again with my co-host for this series, Jesse Tink. Jesse's one of the consultants on our team and the lead pastor of Prairie Lakes Church in Iowa, an awesome multi-site church with 7 locations. Jesse, it's great to have you back here on the podcast for week 3.
Good to be back, Sean.
Before we start this week's podcast, I have an update to share with you. For those of you who have listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know that our teammate Amy Anderson suffered a stroke in April of this year. And since then, Amy's been working hard at recovering. Recently, I had a chance to record an update with Amy, and I'm really excited to be able to share that with you on the podcast today. Well, Amy Anderson, it is great to hear your voice on the podcast again. It's been 4 months since you experienced a stroke, and I have had countless listeners reach out and ask for updates on you just in the weeks since then. So can you share just an update on how you're doing for everyone who's been praying and thinking about you?
Wow. It's just so great to be here in this just today, to be able to speak to all my friends who are out there. So many people who just let me know they were praying for me. And my goodness, this is a space, we're in recording this. This is where I sat every week for over 10 years on the podcast. And April 8th, my life just completely changed. And I'm sure we all have things like that in our life where there's for me, I called it Amy 101, and now we're on 201 because there's a lot that changed that day that I won't get back. But just to say that it's so nice to be here just for a moment with the friends that I walked with for a good decade and, talked about their churches and just learned together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know it's just helpful for so many, even just to hear your voice. I know there was a couple of weeks after you heard your stroke that we didn't talk. And when I got to see you and hear from you again, it was just really encouraging. So I know for so many of your friends, churches you've worked with, you've been on site with, you've been in the trenches with, and even churches that have just heard you on the podcast and have learned from some of your experience over the years. I'm sure it's really encouraging to hear your voice again.
It's an incredible tribe to be a part of. And, I guess I'll just share a few things. First, you might have heard people say, oh, I have so-and-so who had a stroke. And if you've met someone who's had a stroke, you've really met one person who's had a stroke. What I've really learned through this, Sean, is that every stroke is different. And it's ironic, but my stroke is sort of camouflaged by my speech and by my walking. So I was really fortunate to get the speech back in my life. Yeah. I can't say quickly, but all things considered, within 3 months it came back. If I'm tired, it gets worse, but I was able to get that. And so when I talk, people are like, oh my gosh, Amy, it's you. And you know what?
Right.
I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that I have access to my brain and everything that I've learned and all of that, and that I could speak to it. And the second thing is, I was really, really lucky to walk again. And that's not something that a lot of people who have strokes get, but my physical therapy, it came through, and I am walking with every once in a while I'll need maybe a cane, but for the most part, I'm not using that anymore. So people will see me walking, and then they'll hear me talking, and then it's like, we're back on. And for me, with my stroke, my whole right side is numb. So I'm walking on a leg that I can't feel. And I'm just praying that those things will come back. But that's what holds me back from getting back to work, getting back to, to what this next phase of my life is that I just actually have a lot of work to do yet. I have a lot of work to do yet. And I'm praying and trusting the Lord will, be with me this next year, but who knows what it looks like.
Yeah. And one of the most encouraging things I heard you say, Amy, as we were just talking recently was, God still has a purpose for your life. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the encouragement to everybody who listens to the podcast. I mean, there's a lot that we go through personally There's a lot that we go through in ministry. And sometimes the road ahead might not be clear, but God has a purpose for us. And so your perspective on that is actually really encouraging and inspiring for me. I know there's been a lot of people who've been praying for you over the last 4 months. How can people continue to pray for you? What are the specifics that they should think about as they're praying for you?
Sean, through this process, me and my husband are in a land we never have been in before. So it's funny. My husband actually goes back to work this week. He took 3 months off when I had the stroke, and he's been being my coach, coaching me, helping me get back to my feet. But now he'll be back in his lead pastor seat, and I will be. My whole job, my full-time job, Sean, is actually is all the intense therapy I do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is, I wake up, I go for a walk, and then I do my other therapies. I eat lunch, I take a short little nap, and then I do it all over again. And so I would just, if the listeners could actually pray for a little bit of my mental health, honestly. It's hard to be someone who's wired up as a go-go person and recognizing that I really get one day at a time, and I can't actually handle more than one day at a time because of the stroke that I had. So just the endurance there, and then really praying for God's miracle in how much I get back. I will never be the Amy Anderson that was there on April 8th. There's definite loss. You can never, I've heard, you can never quite get it all. But if I could get 80%, 85, 90, 95, gosh, that's my prayer. And I'm going to go after that until God says no. But you're right. There's a lot of time left for me. I'm 57 years old. I love what I have been doing, and I may be back to that. I've learned a lot about the stroke community, and who knows, maybe there'll be a part of that I have to dive into. I'm going to pay attention to what God's doing in my life and where he's calling me and all of that. But if God can just take this next 6 to 8 months and really a path of healing, that's what I am praying for. And that's what I would love to have people pray for.
Well, here's what I know. 80% of Amy Anderson is as sharp as anybody I've met. So we'll take that. Amy, thank you for just sharing all this. And I know, I've just heard from so many people, how can we pray for Amy? And hearing it from you is, I'm sure, really, really encouraging for them. So thanks for doing this on the podcast.
Can I say one thing?
Of course.
So I shouldn't have lived. The kind of stroke that I had was called a hemorrhagic stroke. And only about 13 people have that type of stroke. And half of those people die within 24 hours. That's the kind of stroke I had, and I made it. So that's where I go. I think God spared me. There's a purpose here. But I just want to say to the people who are listening, you have the most important mission on the planet. And you know what? I could have died. And what if I didn't have the church that was doing church for me, that was really caring about people who don't have hope? And you know me, the church for me is, yes, our believers are going to learn stuff every week, but every week we have to be prepared for the people who don't know Jesus, who are broken. And this experience for me, again, I mean, I went through the whole thing with Jesus. I cannot imagine going through this without Christ. And so just for those of you listening, that's the other thing you can do, is just please work hard at being a church that is regularly helping people hear the good news of Christ.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks, Amy. If you're just joining us, this is part 3 of our series, Are You Really Ready for Multisite? Emphasis on the really. And this series is for churches that are growing and just starting to ask whether multisite is the right next step for them. We're walking through what we call the multi-site readiness checkpoints. It's a tool that we use with churches as we lead them through our first launch consulting process. And there are 10 of these checkpoints, and they help you take an honest look before you launch and ask, are we ready or not? And the first week, we covered the first 3 checkpoints in the 10, which are for the church as a whole. They're clarity of DNA, organizational buy-in, and current growth. And last week, we shifted to the team and walked through staff leadership capacity, staff health, and volunteer strength. Today, we're moving to what you do as a church and how you do it. And these 2 checkpoints include what we call your ministry model and defined systems and strategies. And here's the connection between them. Your ministry model is what you do. Your systems are how you've captured it. And both have to be ready to hand to a new location, because it's one thing to know who you are. It's another to make it simple enough and written down well enough that someone else can actually run it.
Yeah, and very much like our consulting process, the further that you get into this one, the more concrete and even like managerial it becomes. So like those first few checkpoints that we talked about in the first couple of episodes, I mean, they're critically important, they're foundational, but they're also a little bit more abstract and conceptual, your DNA, buy-in, the stuff like that. But now we're getting into topics that, well, if you're an executive pastor, finally feel like relevant, or some of your more like director level people. I mean, the world that those of us who are in those seats, the world that we live in is, hey, how do we actually deliver ministry across sites, right? How do we leverage our systems and our structures to bring this campus into existence and move forward together? And so, some of you listening, maybe like we got to experience one another in the room together. And so you will remember that there's a point in the planning process. It's usually like the middle of day 2 where we stop talking about all the things we need to do. And then we actually start designing the projects that we're going to do.
Yeah.
And when we get to that point, to the team in the room, here's what I usually say. So something along the lines of like, hey, to this point, some of the more future-oriented, abstract, visionary, idealistic people in the room have kind of dominated the conversation, and we needed them to. But from this point, we kind of need them to shut up. If you're more concrete in your thinking, if you're more of a project manager, if you're more of a people manager, and maybe you've got a very low tolerance for ambiguity, and maybe you have a very high tolerance for getting things done, this point in the multi-site readiness, this is like your time to shine. And so we don't want the rest of you to check out, but man, if you're wired in this way, this is where we need you to kind of dial in. So this episode is for all of you XPs and directors who manage people systems and operational systems to keep the church moving, keep it on track, go in the right direction. You have a critical role in this process of determining your church's readiness to go multi-site.
Yeah. And I love you said that, because jumping back to last week, this is why your team's so important, right? Yeah. All of us have different giftings and skills. We all play a role in this process. So, all right, before we get into it, let me stop and thank our podcast sponsor, Plain Joe Studios. On our most recent Unstuck Church report, we found of the churches we surveyed, they were actually growing by 12% year over year. And that means, of course, a lot of churches that are paying attention to their worship space right now. Well, the creative team over at Plain Joe works with churches to create beautiful, engaging spaces to help them better connect with their community. They have a team of architectural experts, design experts, branding experts that come in and help you transform worship spaces into attractive, engaging hubs. And if that's an area that your church needs to get better in, I would encourage you reach out to Plain Joe Studio. You can do that today at plainjoe.net. Okay, let's start the conversation around the ministry model. Some of you might call it your programming. That's the old kind of terminology for some of this. And here's the principle. To multiply your church in future locations, you have to define how you do church in a way that's actually scalable at your current location first. And there's a phrase for this we use all the time. You have to simplify to multiply. And that matters because multi-site is about replication. You replicate who you are. We've said it over the first 2 weeks of this podcast series. But you also replicate everything that you do, your programs, events, and the key things on your calendar. So the more you're running here, the more you're asking the new campus to run there. And this is where overprogrammed churches get stuck. I mean, think about how a church builds its programming. Some of you have 20 or 30 years of ministries that you've grown into over time. A ministry got added here, another event got added there, and for most churches, nothing has ever been stopped or pruned. But now imagine handing all of that to a brand new campus on day one. It's not reasonable or wise. So that campus doesn't have 30 years of experience. It has a launch team and a lot to figure out in front of them. So the churches that scale well aren't the ones doing the most. They're the ones who've gotten clear on the few things that matter and do those things well. A simple model is replicable. A complicated one isn't. So, Jesse, what are churches looking for as they begin to clarify their model here?
Yeah, you're describing the gift and curse of multisite, right? Because it's going to reveal all of the stuff that you're doing simply because you can.
Yeah.
Not because you must. And honestly, when we get to this point in the conversation, in the room with churches, there's usually going to be some anxiety or even like defensiveness in the room. Because why? Because there are ministries and ministry initiatives and ministry leaders that feel threatened by this new multi-site initiative that maybe they're going to have to compete a little bit for the church's attention and resources as the church moves in this new direction. And I kind of want to just hit pause and like acknowledge that's real. Okay. You may not cut some of those ministries out of your budget. You may not cut them out of your ministry offerings, but you also aren't going to try and deliver all of them at your next location. And so you have to get honest with yourself, and eventually that's going to mean being honest with others in this process. And I know what some of you are thinking right now. Well, just because I go, we're not going to offer those at the next location doesn't mean I have to cut them all out right now. True. You might feel like you can just let everything you're doing continue to exist while simply adding a multi-site to everyone's plate. You could, but if you do, consider this, okay? Launching a second location, frankly, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It just is. It's really, really good work, but it's a lot. It's a lot. Developing and launching this campus is going to take time out of your calendar. It's going to take time out of your staff's calendar. It's going to take focus. It's going to take attention. By default, okay, it's going to displace some of the things that you're currently doing, or it's going to compete with some of the things you're currently asking your people to do. And so it's better for you to anticipate that and get ahead of it than it is to launch into it and then dodge. One of the exercises that we do in the planning phase, it defines, what you'll offer at your next location from day one, right? Like when that campus opens, what ministries must happen. And it's not rocket science to figure that out, right? What do you need? You need weekend services, a worship, sermon, clear strategy for what the host or campus pastor is communicating from the platform. You need that. You need children's ministry, right? You need to replicate your guest experience. How do we help people connect to the church for the first time? And then you need, some next steps or discipleship stuff to help people connect to serving opportunities or communities so they can grow in their relationship with Jesus and one another. And that's pretty much it, right? Weekends, children's, connection, discipleship. It's a model that's pretty clear, pretty simple, pretty well established. And while you might feel the need probably to like optimize some of those, those are the ones that are your growth engines.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, those are the ministries that drive the overall success and health of the church.
Right.
But as you walk through this process of defining and refining that model, here's what you're often going to find, right? There's a bunch of events that you didn't even know about that are kind of sprinkled into like every single one of those, But here's what multi-site's going to do, especially when you start to grapple with this ministry model question. It's going to force you to kind of do the hard work that you probably should have been doing, but that you neglected. Yeah. It's not unlike moving. When you go from one house to the next, you're always confronted with how much stuff you've accumulated.
Of course. Yeah.
That's
a terrifying thought. I dread the next time we move.
100%, right? Because why? Because it was easier to just put it in some box or some drawer or put it on a shelf. And then you don't think about it sometimes for years and years. But do you really want to carry it into your next home? Is it worth the sweat equity, Because all it's going to do there, and it's just going to sit on a different shelf and take up a different kind of space. And in the church world, these are the things that take up church's resources, people's time, energy, and attention that we probably should steward in a different direction.
And you're back to the idea, Jesse, that we've talked about throughout this series of this. This is great work to get healthy and ready for multi-site, but it's just great, healthy church work too. All right, so let's move on to the practical side here. If you want to know whether your model is ready to multiply, here's where I'd recommend starting out. First, have a pruning conversation before you ever start the new location. Get your team in the room together and put everything on the table, your programming, events, ministries, and then ask the hard question about each one. Does this move people along our discipleship pathway, or is it just something that we've always done? You're not sitting down to cut for the sake of cutting. You're purposefully getting simple enough so that you can multiply in the future. And I want to connect this back to something that we talked about last week. Remember that stop doing list that we talked about for your staff's capacity? This is the same list from a different perspective. Pruning programming is how you free up your team. Jesse talked about just the capacity the team will need. Nothing is innocent. And so the model and the team really are tied together here.
Yeah.
Second thing, do an audit of your on-ramps. Walk through how a brand new person actually gets connected at your church. Be honest about where it gets confusing for people who try to plug in, because the steps that aren't working here at the location that you know inside and out right now are going to be worse at the new campus where the team is working through these steps for the very first time. So easy on-ramps at the sending location become possible on-ramps at the next location. And if you go through this and you realize that your model is too complex to hand off, that's, again, a good thing to know now. It means the next season just is about simplifying before you launch anything. And usually a simpler church is a healthier church anyways. So again, this is back to, we're just doing healthy church work. Multi-site just forces the conversation for us.
Yeah. And if you want a roadmap of exactly how to do this, like a document, I want to point you to two places, okay? So first, we did a podcast back in 2023 on pruning. I went back and found it, Sean.
Yeah.
It's episode 325, okay? 325. Take a listen to that. That's the first place I'd point to you. But second, so I remember listening to that, and I was so inspired by that podcast that I went back to it. I listened to it. I paused, and then I translated what Tony and Amy were saying on that podcast into like a documented exercise that you can run with your team, like complete with charts and facilitation instructions, the whole 9 yards. And now it's offered as a PDF on our website. You can grab it there. I would run that with your teams. The document's called Pruning and Prioritizing Ministry Evaluation to give you a great roadmap to do some of this stuff.
Yeah. So if you go to theunstuckgroup.com, our resource hub there has all of our digital resources. It really is a good tool. Okay, checkpoint number 8, and this one really partners with the last one, and it's define systems and strategies. And here's the principle. You cannot replicate what isn't clearly recorded. It's pretty simple. So let me talk through the challenge and why this one matters. When you go multi-site, your teams are rarely doing ministry near each other anymore. You have people running your ministry in buildings that might be across town or across the state. Jesse, in your case, lots of different areas across Iowa. And that distance has an impact on your team. It creates room for communication to break down, for teams to drift out of alignment, for people to misunderstand what was supposed to happen. When everybody's under one roof, you can get away with this type of thing because you just walk down the hall and you figure it out. You correct things in the moment, but you can't walk down the hall to a campus that's 30 minutes away. So the things that you've been carrying just in your head and passing along by just telling people, those start to fall apart the moment there's a distance between your locations. So it is critical that churches going multi-site sit down and address this before it becomes an issue. And to do that, you move from what we call an oral tradition to a written one. Instead of telling people how things work, you capture things in writing. And anyone at any location then has access to that, and they can run it the same way. That's really what we're looking for, documented, exportable strategies for each ministry. Could you hand a new campus the written version of how you do kids ministry, or your weekend and what the win and success looks like there? Or would they have what they need just by being able to look at the documentation you've put together? On the operations side, are your systems defined well enough that a campus leader can actually work with your central departments without having to guess or call anytime they have a question? They know how to engage your central team. So if you're considering going multi-site, now is the time to ask the key question: are you ready operationally? Do you know how a campus is going to budget, handle money, get communication support, work with HR? Because often those questions don't feel urgent until you have a second location that's asking them and no written answer that's ready to give to them. Jesse, how have you handled this at Prairie Lakes, or even maybe with some of the churches you've been consulting with?
Sure. Well, I mean, and I know there's been such a whipsaw around AI, and its place.
Yeah.
But honestly, like, this is how we're handling it. There's a few of us who are like born and bred documenters. You hear Sean talk about this readiness checkpoint. You go like, yes, finally, I can just sit in my, in front of my computer and just write all this stuff down. Most of us, though, are not. Okay.
Yeah.
Most of us in ministry, we do not relish the idea of sitting down and creating manuals and brand standards for how we do what we do. So this is where, honestly, ChatGPT has been so helpful to us. Like, think about this. If you sat in front of, if you use AI or don't, I'm not trying to, push it one way or the other, but sit in front of it and prompt it with something like, hey, I work at a church and we're trying to document our ministry's best practices and processes in order to have a common reference library that everyone can access across multiple locations digitally. Could you please produce a template that each of our ministry leaders can use to start building that library?
That's a good prompt.
Yeah. And then you kind of hone that template in, right? You're letting something else do the work, right? And so once you create that template, the next step here is get your key staff leaders in the room to take a look at it before you unleash it on them. Share the goal of it, get their input into its design, help them see how you want them to use it, how you want the church to use it before you tell them that they have to use it. But once you finalize that with their input, man, set them loose to populate that template for their area of ministry. And once they do, and they come back and they, deliver that, then create a shared cloud-based drive or file system where everyone at every location can access it. This is one of those things that I think you can choose to be as simple as you want it to be, as high level as you want it to be, or you can kind of be as specific and weedy as you prefer. It's kind of the cool thing about AI, whether it's ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, whatever, you can interface it with your digital file system and have it be the search engine that your staff uses. So let me just give you like this vision here for the finish line. How cool would it be? Just imagine, like, if your next steps person at your next location who's maybe newer to your staff, imagine they have a question about your baptism process or child dedication, right? Comes up in multisite all the time. How cool would it be if you had a clearly documented resource that they could easily find or even have a conversation about with your AI-based search engine and resource? Like, that kind of vision or finish line, it can be pretty compelling and motivating to get this project up and running.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea. And you didn't ask AI to put together the system for you. You asked it to put together the template, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I love that. So let's move to the practical side here too. If you need to move from that oral tradition to the written tradition, here's where I think you start. And to be honest, this is the least exciting checkpoint in the series. I think you said this already, Jesse. Very few people get into ministry to write process documents. But this is often the difference between a campus launch that creates momentum and a campus launch that creates frustration. So first thing, document your decision rights, how decisions actually get made. This is the one that a whole lot of churches skip, and it causes probably the most tension later. Who decides what? What does a campus decide on its own? What does Central get to decide? When we work with churches through this first launch process, we help them clarify who gets to make what decisions by these specific categories. First, Central decides, meaning the Central team makes the call on their own. Next, Central decides with campus input, which means the Central team still has decision rights, but they include the campus as they gather information before the decision. The third option is the decision is made by consensus, meaning neither Central or the campus is opposed to the decision. Next, the campus decides with Central input, which of course means Central shares information, but the campus makes the call. And then lastly, we have campus decides, which means the campus has full decision-making ability around that issue. So Sit down and determine how your decision rights are what they look like, and then how their decisions get made, and then write those down before you ever get to a disagreement, not in the middle of a disagreement. The second thing, write down your money processes. How does a campus build its budget? How does it handle money day to day? What can it spend without asking? And then what needs a sign off from somebody centrally? Money is often where the distance between campuses creates the most confusion. So get that on paper as well. Third thing, build a communications playbook. How does a campus get something promoted? Who makes graphics? Who runs the announcements? How does a campus request support? A new location shouldn't need to reinvent the communication strategy. In fact, that's a really bad idea.
Yeah, right.
Fourth thing, document your HR processes. How do you hire, onboard people, and handle staff issues across your locations? When your people are spread out, we'll just handle it as it comes up, that stops working. You can't do it that way. So here's the encouraging part. This work is valuable, again, if you ever go multi-site or not. When you move a church from oral tradition to written tradition, everything, I think it gets clearer for the people that you already have. Multi-site, it just makes this a non-negotiable for your church.
Almost every single church, Sean, that I've been on the ground with in multi-site planning walks away with this, what we're talking about here, as one of their key initiatives. Mm-hmm. Okay, they all start going, okay, we need to go from oral to written, almost every single one. And that last sentence of yours there, I think, is a really good one to repeat. This work is valuable, even if you never go multi-site. This month, I'm starting my third decade in ministry.
Wow. Now you do sound old, Jesse.
I know. It's because I am. But here's what's even crazier is every single one of those years has been with the same church. 20 years at the same church, which is pretty unique. Okay. So here's what I'm noticing at this stage in my ministry career. There's a next generation of leaders now, or staffers, who have stepped into high-level roles, who just, like it always is, they just haven't had the same set of shared experiences or learnings that the rest of us, long in the tooth, crafty veterans have had. And before you anticipate where I'm going with this, too often I make the assumption that they already know, or they're probably already pretty comfortable, or at the very least, they don't want coaching from the guy who wants to tell the story from how it was back in 2008. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I assume that, but then what I find instead is this. They're trying to come up with solutions to some of these really old and ever-present problems, like volunteer recruitment or development, not knowing that we've already solved that one.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're just doing their best to figure something out or do something the right way, but secretly wish that they didn't have to build the ship as they were sailing it. So when you take seriously the task of going from oral to written, you're really setting the next generation up to not only learn from their history, but to spend their best energies on new problems and new opportunities. And don't get me wrong. Okay, these documents that you create, the system that it's not stone tablets, right? You're going to iterate on them. You're going to improve on them. You're going to change them, but you shouldn't have to recreate them conversationally every time the same issue pops back up. You shouldn't. Yeah. And this is maybe a little bit of a shot across the bow. You shouldn't leave the church wide open to all of their organizational history and managerial processes walking out the door with you.
All right. Let's close out today's episode, Jesse. We've covered two more of the readiness checkpoints, the ministry model and the defined systems and strategies. And again, what ties them together, one is about getting simple, the other is about getting it written down. Because a model that's too complex can't be multiplied. A model that's only captured in your head can't be handed off to somebody else. And to go multi-site, you need something clear enough to repeat and capture well enough to share with others. So I'll give you the last word, Jesse. What's the key thought leaders need to be walking away with from today's conversation?
Yeah, I'm going to quote Andy Stanley again. He's got this phrase that he uses when he talks about like his communication or his leadership philosophy. He says, what's memorable is portable, right? What's memorable is portable. And when we're talking about today's conversation, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make our ministry more portable. Unlike a sermon, we're not trying to make it more portable by making it more memorable, right? But we're trying to make it more portable by documenting it. So here's what I would add to making our ministry model a little bit more portable. I would say what's portable is repeatable. If you give access to the same documented standards to everyone, then what happens is everyone, everywhere your church exists, will be able to do ministry in the way that your church does it. So what's portable is repeatable. Building on that, what's repeatable is transferable. Here's what I mean by that. A documented library of your church's ministry model is like one of the greatest gifts you can give to your campus pastor, because it'll be an invaluable resource for both coaching his staff as well as holding them accountable. He can transfer your way of doing ministry to all of his staff and volunteers. What's repeatable is transferable. And then finally, here's what I would say. What's transferable is scalable. It's a lot of heavy lifting at first. It is. Documenting all of these processes and strategies and standards and decision-making rights and blah, 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 right? But you only have to do it once.
Right.
You don't have to do it every time a new campus launches. They just get to benefit from the work already done. It's scalable. Without it, you have to recreate the training and the coaching wheel, with every new staffer, every campus launch. But when you have it, you can launch at whatever pace God opens up. What's transferable is scalable. So when it comes to this, right? Portable is repeatable. What's repeatable is transferable. And what's transferable is scalable. If you want to launch new locations, get this part done and out of the way.
That's good. I hope we've convinced some people in ministry now to get into process documentation. I think they'll walk away from today's conversation excited about it, don't you?
Yeah.
I hope so. All right. Well, here's what I hope that you're noticing across this whole series. And none of the checkpoints require you to launch anything to start working on them. Simplifying your model and writing down your systems, they're just good work for your team. It makes your church healthier today, whether a second location happens or not. Multi-site readiness, it just becomes the bonus for you. So next week, we wrap up the series with the final 2 checkpoints: financial strength and a replicable weekend experience. We'll talk about what it takes to actually fund a launch without putting your church at risk, and whether your weekend, the thing that you do that most people show up for, is something that you can deliver on in more than one place. It's the last piece of the readiness picture. So don't miss next week. If today put words to that gap that you've been sensing, whether it's the model that's become too complicated or systems that still only live in people's heads, that's the kind of work that we're doing every week with churches. Our team at the Unstuck Group walks with churches through our multi-site launch process to help them assess their readiness across all 10 checkpoints, clarify their model, build a clear phased plan to launch that first location with confidence. And I would even say more locations into the future if that's part of your vision. Yep. The goal is that your first launch is healthy and sustainable, and it reaches the people that you're trying to reach from the grand opening of that location. And most churches going multi-site have few people, if anyone, in leadership who've done this before. So don't go at this alone. If you'd like to start a conversation about how we could help, head to theunstuckgroup.com/multisite. And again, if this podcast or this series has been helpful for you, would you take a minute and just leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening on? It'll only take you a few seconds, but it helps a lot of other church leaders find these conversations. Jesse, thanks again. We'll be back next week for the wrap up to this series. So listeners, we'll see you next week.